Tomorrow we are leaving Spain after spending the last 10 days exploring 2 major cities, a beach town, and a few mountain villages.
And today we're going to be sharing what we loved and didn't love about our time here in Spain from the beautiful Caminito del Rey. And at the end of this video, we'll let you know if we'd ever consider a return trip to this country.
Now we're going to start off by discussing the drinks and dining here in Spain because honestly that's probably what we are most excited for. Now one thing that I absolutely loved is that you can find coffee shops all over the place here, and even if you can't find a coffee shop, most of the restaurants do have espresso machines and are capable of making really good lattes, cafe con leches, and cappuccinos. And while they may be a little bit smaller than the ones you typically find in the States, they only cost like $1.50 or $2, so you can buy like 3 or 4 of them for the price of one in the States.
Now, I really like that most of the restaurants offered tapas, which are small plates. This allowed us to try a lot of different foods, so we really enjoyed trying all of the different dishes. Also, I should mention a lot of the restaurants and cafes had fresh squeezed orange juice, and it was affordable and really delicious.
Another thing that I really loved was the availability of fresh seafood, which we were able to try a lot of, because in many places we found it to be only like half the price of what it normally is in Florida. And then when you include the fact that you don't have to tip, it's even less expensive. So we were able to eat a lot of seafood that we wouldn't normally eat, and most of it was extremely fresh and delicious. Now, being a big fan of olives, the abundance of olives in the grocery stores and in the restaurants here in Spain is another thing that I loved, but I didn't necessarily love the fact that the bread came served with olive oil. I do much prefer butter on my bread, but Jamie actually prefers the olive oil. Now, getting back to the drinks, I was a little bit nervous that I wouldn't be able to find good beers in Spain since it's known for being such a big wine country. But the local beers in Spain actually are really good, and I could often find them on draft for like the equivalent of $1.50 or $2 US. I also loved the fact that it seemed to be pretty socially acceptable to enjoy a beer or a coffee almost any time of the day or night.
Something else I really enjoyed was the availability of outdoor seating at a lot of the establishments. But a negative does come with that. We experienced a lot of people coming up to us and asking for money, whether it be a street performer or a homeless person. They were a little more aggressive than what we are used to, so it's just something to be aware of if you're sitting outside, especially in the bigger cities. There are a few more negatives that we do want to talk about with the dining experience. Here, they do not give you free water, so you do have to purchase water at restaurants. And because of that, we saw that a lot of people were drinking beer or wine because honestly, in some cases, it was cheaper than water or just a little bit more expensive. Now, while most establishments do have a restroom you can use if you are a customer there, we had a hard time finding public restrooms. And when we could find public restrooms, they were not in really good shape.
Now, we've always heard that the service at restaurants is much slower in Spain and in Europe in general, so we were expecting it to be quite a bit slower on this trip, and it was. Oftentimes it would take quite a while for the server to take our order or to get our check after we were done eating. But what surprised us is that after we actually placed our food orders, oftentimes it came out really fast. I'd say it generally came out faster than it does in the States, especially when ordering tapas. Another thing that really surprised me is how much I actually enjoyed the sangria here. I am typically not a big fan of red wine, but the Spanish sangria is absolutely delicious. I think I tried it at 4 or 5 different places, and I enjoyed every one of them. Yet another thing that surprised me is how much I liked the chocolate. Generally, Jamie loves chocolate, and I can take it or leave it, but all of the chocolate I tried here in Spain, I actually enjoyed.
Now, before we move on to our next topic, we wanted to take some time to show you a few shots from our absolutely stunning filming location for the day, Caminito del Rey. And while we share the beauty of this famous Andalusia attraction, Skylar's going to tell you a bit about it.
Caminito del Rey is Spanish for the King's Little Path. It's located in a national park here in Spain. It was once actually known to be one of the most dangerous hikes in the entire world, and you'll probably be able to find some YouTube videos that claim that it still is. But as you can see, they have installed safety wires and fences, and it's now a very safe hike. Even children can do it, but if you have a fear of heights, it's still probably going to be a little bit scary. Now, even though it is quite safe, you do still have to wear helmets because you are often walking right along the edge of a mountain, and there is always a possibility of rocks falling.
There's a train that actually goes through these mountains. How cool is that? We'll have to find out which train that is, so maybe someday we can ride it.
Yeah.
This has been the coolest part of the trail by far. So far, at least. The patterns in the rock on this side of the mountain are really cool to see. Very pretty. The water is a really pretty green color. Whoa. Oh my gosh. This bridge moves a lot. Look, Skylar's back there. He said he likes how it feels. It has a lot of bounce to it, I'd say. Next, we want to talk about transportation. We absolutely loved how easy it was to get to different cities via bus or train. And then once you were at a city, they had different bus lines. You could pay for them. Some of them were even free, but they were very inexpensive. But we never ended up using those buses because we found the city centers to be so walkable.
Now in the major cities in Spain, they do have Uber and a couple other European ride-hailing apps. And they also have a similar app that you can actually use to order taxi cabs, and sometimes the taxis are cheaper than Uber or the other ride-hailing apps. Now, of course, you can also choose to rent a car, which we did on our last few days here in Spain when we were going up into the mountains. And we thought the car rental process here in Spain was actually quite easy and inexpensive compared to some of the other countries we've rented cars in. Now, once you've actually rented your car, driving here in Spain can be fun, but also quite stressful. I really enjoyed driving through the mountains. The roads were well maintained, and some of them were pretty wide and had a lot of viewing points to stop off at. But driving in the city centers and in the small mountain villages was definitely not nearly as enjoyable, mainly because the streets were just so narrow and winding. You couldn't always see if there was another car coming from the other direction. And then when you would meet that car, oftentimes you'd have to back up to get to a wider part of the road or pull way over to the edge of the road just so you could fit by each other. It was pretty stressful, and if you do rent a car and plan on driving in the cities or in the small villages, I would definitely recommend getting a compact one.
Now, I know Skylar mentioned how stressful the driving was for him, but it was also stressful for me as a passenger. And honestly, if it weren't for his willingness to drive on these crazy roads, we wouldn't have made it to some of our favorite spots on this trip. Now, there were a few times we were concerned about damaging our rental car when driving through those really narrow streets, but overall during this trip, we never found ourselves in a situation where we were concerned about our safety. Even when we were walking in the city at night, whether the street was really busy or completely empty, we always felt safe.
Not only did we never feel like we really had to worry about any sort of crime, but we also felt really safe just walking around on the streets, because in Spain it seems like drivers are much more considerate of pedestrians. If we were anywhere in the vicinity of a crosswalk, the drivers would almost always stop and wait to see if we are going to walk through, whereas in the US it seems like maybe a 50-50 shot at best that they'll even stop for you when you're in the crosswalk. And staying on the topic of driving, we were expecting to see a lot of roundabouts here in Spain because Europe is kind of known for those. But one thing I really didn't enjoy that I encountered was a double roundabout. There were actually two roundabouts connected to each other, and that was one of the weirdest and more challenging driving situations that we encountered here in Spain. Yet another thing that we were expecting that we didn't enjoy about driving here in Spain was the price of the fuel. It definitely was quite a bit more expensive than the cost of fuel in the States.
Another thing we loved kind of ties in with food, drinks, and transportation, and that is the healthy lifestyle. There doesn't seem to be near as much processed food, and fresh fruits, veggies, and seafood seems to be more readily available. Also, the culture doesn't seem to promote overconsumption. From our experience, if you're at a restaurant and the server thinks you might be ordering too much food, they might actually tell you that, which is something that doesn't typically happen in the States. Also, because the cities are so walkable, we think people just get more exercise in their day-to-day lives.
And while they do seem to be more healthy here in Spain in general, there definitely are a few aspects of Spanish culture that aren't as healthy. They definitely do drink more coffee, they do seem to drink more beer, and definitely more wine. And there are many more people smoking on the streets, and you even see cigarette machines in many bars and restaurants.
We also love the abundance of small businesses. We didn't see a bunch of fast food chains or big grocery stores in the city centers. Instead, there were small grocery stores every few blocks and a ton of mom and pop shops. It was also nice that a lot of the tourist attractions, like accessing the castles, the churches, and even this hike, were very reasonably priced. They were much less expensive compared to similar experiences in the States.
Yet another thing we really enjoyed about Spain is just how clean the cities are in general. We found there to be lots of trash bins and even recycling bins around the city, and you can just really tell how much pride the people take in keeping their cities clean. But unfortunately, the sanitization in Spain left a little bit to be desired. One example of that was at the market in Malaga. There was a big bowl of olives, and people were actually reaching in with their bare hands, and then they were proceeding to sell olives out of that same bowl. Another example is the restrooms. Now, we did find that most of the restrooms in Spain do have sinks outside of them where you can wash your hands, but some of those sink areas didn't have any soap at all or any sort of hand sanitizer.
Another thing we really appreciated about Spain being tourists that cannot speak the language well, we found that a lot of people did know a little bit of English, and in most cases, if they didn't know a little bit of English, they were more than willing to try to communicate with us with our poor Spanish. There were only a couple instances in the smaller cities where people seemed a little annoyed that we couldn't speak Spanish better. Now, the next thing I love about Spain is that you're never more than a few hours from the beach or the mountains. And during our trip in southern Spain, we were never more than an hour away from both. Because we were here in the wintertime, we spent more time in the mountains. If we came back in the summer, we would spend much more time on the beach.
Another area where we found Spain to be quite a bit different from in the States is lodging. Now, one thing we loved about the lodging is we were definitely able to get quite a bit more for our money than we would have in the States. We stayed at some really nice hotels and Airbnbs in really great locations and still spent less than an average of $100 per night. Now, one thing we didn't love as much about the lodging was the check-in process. In the States, there's almost always someone at a hotel desk 24 hours, and for Airbnbs, you can usually check in electronically with a key code or access a physical key through a lockbox. But here in Spain, a few of our spots, we actually had to meet up with a person to retrieve a key, and that means getting in touch with them ahead of time to plan the meetup, and it just really makes you have less flexibility when you're planning your travels.
We also didn't love that the hours on Google for restaurants and stores seemed to be much more unreliable when compared to the States. For example, this morning I went out to get a coffee at 7 a.m. at a place that was supposed to be open and found that none of the businesses in the village that we were staying at were open. Now, when we did find a restaurant that was open, it wasn't uncommon to have a hard time finding parking. A lot of these businesses only had a few spots, and if those were taken, it could be really hard to find close by parking. Now, the last thing we really don't love about Spain is that we have to leave tomorrow. We were only able to experience a small area in southern Spain, and there are so many places we would love to see in Spain, so we absolutely would consider planning another trip back to this beautiful country. Now, the information we have shared in this episode has been from our experiences over the last 10 days. So if you've had different experiences in southern Spain or even other areas of Spain, we'd love to hear about them in the comments.
And if you haven't seen our experiences from our prior days here in Spain, you can join us on those adventures by clicking on this playlist right now. Thanks for watching.